Hi, everybody. This is Fred from WP Shout, and we're here with a Q&A webinar for up and running buyers. This is the third of four, so in this one we're covering the third of up and running, but we're also here to cover the other two sections of up and running and really to just kind of field open questions on WordPress development generally. So let's get into it. You can either ask your questions in the Zoom chat or unmute yourself and yeah, what can I help with? Hi, I'll go ahead and unmute you. And is it good? We can hear you. Is it Kai or K? Remind me.
It's K.
K. How's
Yeah.
it going?
Good. May I ask a thing here? I wonder, in WordPress, you have a archive page for a blog.
Yeah.
With a certain number of blogs posts. And if you want to have two archive pages on the same site with one is for blog posts and the other is for podcasts. Then I think I have to use two different categories to sort them. But if I would like to avoid different categories, can I have two different archive pages for posts?
Good question. So the topic that your question is within would be the WordPress template hierarchy.
Yeah.
And here's how I would go about that. Sorry, that's my dog's tail. Lucy, could you chill out?
Nice.
Yeah. So if you're running a site that has blog posts and podcasts, what I would do is I would register podcasts as a custom post type.
Okay.
And you can do that with, you can do it using code, but you can also do it using the plugin Pods, or there's a plugin CPTUI, stands for Custom Post Type User Interface. Either of those will let you register custom post types. And in general, yeah, I mean, a blog and a podcast are two pretty different things, and podcasts are always going to have, you know, probably like an audio embed in them. So they're different enough that I would split them out into different post types. And then in terms of having an archive for your podcast post type, yeah, you can absolutely do that. So I'll just show you a little bit. I'll just show you a couple things. So if you look at WP Shout, we have three main content types. Articles is actually just our posts. So when we want to write a new article, we actually just go, you know, new post.
Yes. This
would write a new article. But then we've got courses and quick guides and links. And each of those is its own post type. And so when you look at these, when you look at these archive pages, if I wanted to add a post into this archive, what I would do is I would do new course. So we've just gone ahead and registered the course post type and given it a bunch of properties like custom fields and that kind of thing. And then you can see the template file that's handling this is archive-course.php. So if you look at WP Hierarchy, which is a website that actually we maintain to help people understand the WordPress template hierarchy.
That's good.
You'll see that, you know, this, so you'll see that basically things get more specific from left to right. So if you've got an archive page, right, like, well, excuse me, I'm sorry, things get more specific from right to left. Excuse me about that. So like archive.php is like the kind of bucket that holds any archive you might want to do. In other words, it's the ultimate fallback. So if you don't say anything else about what kind of archive page this is, you'll end up at archive.php. And if you don't have an archive.php, you'll end up at index.php. So index.php is the kind of the final fallback for all content. But for any archive, the fallback is archive.php. But there's an awful lot of kinds of archive, right? Author archives, category archives. And the thing you're looking for, based on our discussion so far, is a custom post type archive.
Okay.
And the way that you register these template files, like these names are not arbitrary. The author.php will always be an author archive page. So anytime you go to, like, if you were to go to, if we click on, you know, David's name here, we're going to author David, and this is his archive. This is his archive page. And you can see we're using the template author.david.php. I think he basically wrote himself his own archive page because he wanted to put this introductory text here. So if you look at the WordPress template hierarchy, this would fall back to author.php, but he himself wrote an author nicename.php that is what shows up when you go to his author archive. So anyway, what you actually want is an archive that's a custom post type archive, you know, archive-podcast. So if the name of your post type is podcast, you would just create an archive-podcast.php, and you could style it as you want it. So it could look exactly like your base archive.php, or you could make all kinds of changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's nice, because I have in fact bought the plugin, the custom post type plugin. So, but I haven't used it before, so it will be the first time for me now.
Yeah. So ACF. So you're saying you bought Advanced Custom Fields?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Wait, you bought ACF Pro, or you bought what plugin did you buy that does custom post types?
Oh, Advanced Custom Post Types, I think the name was.
Okay. So I'm not familiar with that one. There's Advanced Custom Fields, which does basically custom fields, post meta. But I don't believe ACF actually registers new post types.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a good idea to have ACF Pro. That wasn't a waste of money. But
No.
what you'll want to use are these the two good choices that we recommend for doing this in a kind of drag and drop way are pods and CPT UI. Those two plugins.
CPT UI, yes.
Yeah, and those are both free.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and they actually both have an interface that's pretty visually similar to ACF, to Advanced Custom Fields, but instead of creating custom fields, you're creating entirely new post types.
Okay. I think it looked as if it would be possible to do in Gutenberg also with the help of blocks, but I'm not so used to it.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it that way, because what you're trying to do is kind of more at the level of like the guts, or the sort of deep kind of internals of the way your data is structured. And Gutenberg is not really. Gutenberg is more at the level of display, consuming your data to cause things to look a certain way. It's not so much at the level of like reworking the internals of how your site's data is organized. So yeah, that kind of like deep internal stuff is very much what the sort of PHP fundamentals that are covered in Up and Running are about. There's a lot of display stuff where you can use Gutenberg or a page builder or something like that.
Yeah.
But for actually reworking your site's data and accessing it in a new way, like creating a new archive, a new type of archive page, you generally need PHP. The only kind of out that I would mention, if you don't want to, like, not you personally, but if someone doesn't want to learn PHP but they wanted to create an archive page for their podcast, the only out that I would recommend looking into would be the Beaver Themer plugin.
Oh yeah.
And what Beaver Themer does is it basically creates its own sort of drag and drop WordPress template hierarchy.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's worth looking at if you don't if you're not excited to chew on a lot of PHP. But if you are, then you know, the WordPress template hierarchy is the way to do it.
Nice. Good answer. Thank you very much.
My
Then
pleasure.
you put me on the track.
Okay, my pleasure, Kay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, who else? Robert asks, this might seem like a stupid question, but could you explain return versus echo? That is not a stupid question. That's a great question. And yes, absolutely. So return and echo are two statements in PHP. And the kind of return versus echo distinction is kind of like, is one of a few kinds of divides or distinctions that kind of runs straight down the heart of WordPress. So return is like, when you think return, you think things like filter or like get the title. When you think echo, you think things like action or the title. Now, that's not across the board, but return and echo is like this core distinction, and a lot of things kind of fall under that distinction. So it's extremely important to know the difference. And once you know that difference, a lot of things in WordPress kind of like line up on the two sides of that. Sort of like, you know, sky and land. Like, does this animal live on the land or in the sky? You know, it's like, once you know that, a lot of stuff makes sense. So here's how it works. They're both PHP concepts. Return gives something back to the thing that called it. Echo just prints something out onto the page. So I'm going to try to live code this, which is usually a problem. And I'm just going to do it on a site that I have access to, which is writers.com. And let's see. Okay, here we go. So let's just, so please ignore all the code around here. This is kind of not great. Yeah, and I'm just going to make myself a new function. So add action. Let's see. What's the best way I can do this? Okay. So add action init demo. UAR echo return demo. Function UAR echo return demo. Okay, and this is something I like to do when I'm just like writing code that I don't want other people to find. I'm going to say that I'm going to add like a little get variable right here. So that if this query string is not found, the function doesn't run at all. Or it runs, but it returns, which I'll explain what that means in a minute, because that's the question. Okay, and then we're just going to echo hi and die. All right, so let me see if I can upload that. And let me make sure I didn't break the site. Okay, and then we're gonna, so this, again, this is kind of like a trick I use when I'm cowboy coding sites, which is not the best thing to be doing anyway. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But basically on a normal page load, like the code I just wrote won't run. But if I add a query string, and we can make it say whatever, you know, we'll make it say sure. Now that we have this query string, that creates a variable, that creates this as part of this like get kind of super global variable. And so since it is set at this point, now the code below will run. So when I put this in here, we just get hi and it dies. Okay, so all of that was setup work to just be able to get code out onto the page. So what does echo do? echo prints whatever it is. So we're running on the init action, which is like basically the first or one of the first things that runs in WordPress. And we're ignoring this code because the if statement doesn't apply. And so here we are, we're running on line 182, we're running echo hi, and then we die, so nothing else happens. And so what we get is this blank page with hi printed out onto it. Hi. Okay, we'll just change it to double quotes so that I can use an apostrophe. I mean, you can also escape your characters and it works fine. But hi, I've been echoed, which basically means printed. As HTML. Hi, I've been echoed, which basically means printed out as HTML. All right. So that's echo. It just prints stuff onto the page. Now, what can it print? It can print anything. It can print HTML. It can print a mixture of like HTML tags and text. So we'll go ahead and have an H1 here, and the text should get bigger. Yep. You can even print JavaScripts, which are, after all, just a kind of an HTML tag. So we could say alert, pop me up. So you can even echo out a JavaScript tag, and you kind of get JavaScript behavior. I'm not saying this is a particularly good practice or anything, but just to prove you can do it. So now we're running. The script runs first, and it alerts pop me up, which creates one of these annoying little pop-ups, right? And then we get our H1. So all that is echo. Echo means print to the page, print out as HTML. And when I say print to the page, what do I mean? I mean like print into the HTML document. So we've got a script and a H1, and that's pretty much all we've got. And then, you know, I guess Chrome itself kind of added an HTML tag and a head and a body and all that. Or maybe WordPress did, I'm not sure. But that's what it means. Print me out to the page as, you know, markup, HTML and text. That's echo. Now, what is return? Well, you're actually seeing return here. So let's say, you know, we load a page on here that doesn't have this query string. Then what happens is that this thing is not set, so we go to line 177 and we return. Well, we're not returning anything. So the effect of this is just, return means go back to whoever called you. And it's important to know what it means to call something. To call something is, okay, good. So we can do it this way. So function call me. Function UAR call me. Return, I'm some returned text. I'll eventually be printed out. Okay. So okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out the cleanest way to explain this. So if I, okay, so here's what I'll do first. I'll show you that if I return all this, the change that's gonna happen, here, we'll just forget about this function for a second. So instead of echoing, I'm gonna return all this text, okay? So what's gonna happen? Oh, right, it doesn't, right, of course, it doesn't. So because it returns, the die statement never runs. Okay, so that's not a good example of what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. So let's just call UAR call me, the function we defined on lines 183 to 185. So we're just gonna run that function. And then we're gonna die. In other words, we're gonna stop anything else from loading. Okay, so what do we get now? A blank page. Why is the page blank? Well, it's blank because, you know, no HTML has been added to it. Well, what's the problem? Well, we ran UAR call me, right? Now what happened with you? What happened when UAR call me ran? What happened is UAR call me gave back, which is what it means to return. UAR call me gave back this string of text. But we didn't do anything with that string of text. We didn't do anything with it. We got it, but we did nothing with it. And therefore, the page has nothing on it. Now, if we echo UAR call me, now we're printing to the page. What are we printing to the page? We're printing what UAR call me gave back to us. We're printing the returned value of the UAR call me function. So when you run UAR call me, what UAR call me does is it gives back, in this case, just this very simple text string. So basically what happens is the UAR call me thing basically turns into its returned value. It sort of turns into that. And then that gets printed out to the page. So that's essentially how echo and return work. Return is always in the context of like something being called, a function being called for the most part. And it basically gives back to the location it was called, whatever its value was. And you can do that, and you can, okay, with the return value, what do? You can save it to a variable. So let's say we save this to a variable, then what? Blank screen. Why do we get a blank screen? Because we saved the return value to a variable, but we didn't do anything with it. But if we now echo it, maybe plus some text that we add ourselves, then we get the contents of that variable, which were returned back from the UAR call me function. And then we add our own little thing to it as well. And all that gets printed, meaning echoed, onto the page. And just to go sort of into up and running and kind of mention this distinction, like how this distinction is helpful, like, or where this distinction shows up. A filter always returns something, whereas an action is often echoing something. So that there's like that dichotomy there. And we have these functions like the title, right? But we also have these functions like get the title, right? Get the title returns, the title of the current post. The title doesn't return anything. It just prints it straight out. So the title just echoes the title, and get the title returns the title. So this kind of echo return dichotomy is kind of all over, WordPress development. And yeah, the places to look at those, pieces I was just talking about would be magic. Yeah, so the magic of the and get the post template tags talks about in depth the kind of like these functions echo something, these functions return something thing. And then the hooks, actions, and filters chapter, talks about how filters are always returning a value, and actions for the most part are just echoing something and not returning anything. Yeah, so I suspect that was a very long explanation, but I hope it was helpful. Yeah, Robert, would you like to follow up with anything? Robert says, perfect. So return holds the value for use somewhere else while echo outputs it. Echo definitely outputs whatever it's echoing, which always has to be a string, by the way. In other words, you can't echo an array or a PHP object or something like that. Now, anything that echo outputs gets turned into a string, and you can't turn an array into a string. That doesn't make sense. So you just kind of will run into problems if you try to do that. But you can echo the number 10 and it'll output the string quote 10. So you can do that, but echo is always printing out strings. And HTML, like the HTML contents of a page is like a giant string, right? It's a giant string of like tags and text and stuff. And so what PHP is mostly responsible for doing is giving like your browser a big giant string of HTML that it can turn into a web page. Although PHP can do other stuff, backend stuff that never echoes anything, I would say the main responsibility of PHP is to produce strings to echo. When you say return holds the value for use somewhere else, that's one way to look at it. What I would say is return gives back a value, for use somewhere else. So you could say it holds it, but it's more like it gives it back, it returns it. So in other words, the second function does all this math to figure out what the value is. And I just wouldn't use the word holds, it's more like gives it back. I did all this math and here's what I created. I'm going to return, you gave me a bunch of raw material. I did all this math on it. I assembled it into a nice, cabinet or something. And here, I'm going to return the cabinet so that you can continue decorating your house, sort of like that. Return needs to be called, yes. Yeah, so you need to call the function that's returning something for sure. And if you write just like, return quote, hello, like nothing will happen because nothing's being done with that value. It's like if I just give a cabinet just out to nobody and it just sits on the sidewalk, nothing happens. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, I hope that made sense. And we did actually write some articles on echo and return. If you just search WP Shout for echo, and if you search WP Shout for return, there's a bunch more. There's a bunch more there. Here, there's that, and I think we wrote like a parallel article for learning PHP for WordPress development, understanding PHP's echo, and understanding learning PHP for WordPress development, understanding PHP's return. Oh yeah, right, and yeah. So Robert's saying he came across it in the like 15-minute attempt. My attempt to explain PHP in 15 minutes. Sounds good. All right, what other questions? So feel free to unmute yourself if you like, or type something into the chat. Yeah, so anything you guys are curious about? I mean, the day-to-day of doing freelance work, literally anything can be a very general question, or why does his singular work the way it was? Kind of literally anything. Lisa, I can hear you.
Yeah, I guess I could go.
Let's hear it.
I just inherited a site for which the theme author wrote 23 separate single templates. As far as I can tell, the only difference between the templates is the class and ID of the container, which has an effect on the CSS. And the way that that's appearing in the post editing area is from a plugin that hasn't been maintained in 7 years.
Wait, the way that's appearing in the post editing area.
When you're editing the post, you can choose one of these templates.
Oh, sure. Okay. All right.
So I don't want to keep it. It seems like a lot of stuff for a little bit of, outcome. Yeah. And I also would rather not be using a 7-year obsolete plugin. So I'm thinking that rather than doing all of that, if I can register some kind of field in the post editing area so they still have that choice, and then have some kind of filter on single.php, which just adds that class or ID to the main container. I don't need 23 separate colored templates. And so I'm throwing that out there in case you have any ideas about how to pursue that.
Yeah.
Or
Great
that's my
question.
idea about the cleanest way to solve the problem, but maybe you have another idea.
That's a great question, and I think you're essentially on the right track. Basically, the only difference in those template files seems to be the way that CSS, that the site's CSS thinks about them, which is based, I think you said it's based on classes and IDs that are being added to the container element, which is something like what? Main, like div class equals main ID equals yellow or something like that.
Yeah, that's the only difference in every single template is one line of code that gives a class and ID to the main wrapper.
Okay, and does the main wrapper wrap everything, like the main content and the sidebar, or?
Possibly. I haven't had a chance to dig into it that far yet, but
all right. So yeah, I think what I was actually thinking, like the body, like there's a function in WordPress called body class that you could just write to, but I think you're absolutely right. So here's what, yeah, I mean, the way you want to do it sounds absolutely right to me, which is you register 2 ACF fields. One is like, you know, wrapper class, and another is wrapper ID. And then you in the single.php template, you just make sure that that whatever class is in that ACF field is outputted in the kind of class declaration of the wrapper, and the same with the wrapper's ID. And so it would look something like it's just like, you know.
oh, you somehow get the field.
Yeah, so it would look like, you know, div class equals, you know, theme wrapper. And then you would say, you know, PHP, like the field. By the way, just because we were just talking, right? What is the field? The ACF has 2 functions, the field and get, I think it's get field, right? What's the difference between them? The field echoes, get field returns. So you could do PHP echo get the field, you know, wrapper class for the current post ID, you know, get the ID. And you know, then you know, that's that, and then, you know, ID equals, or I don't think it's get the field, I think it's get field, sorry, not get the field. And then you'd have, you know, PHP echo get field wrapper ID, and basically you just yeah, that ought to work, I think. And then you can just get rid of all of those additional page templates. Yeah. And you just manage the class and the ID just on the back end using advanced custom fields.
Yeah, and I can get rid of that old plugin.
Yeah, you should be able to do that. You might want to do all this on a staging site.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, okay, good. Because, you know, stuff can get lost in translation, or, you know, sites that are badly built come with surprises, you know. So
yeah, this is not the only one, but let's stick. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, give that a try. But I think the way you're thinking about it is like the exact right way.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, Norm asks, in my example function, I gave kind of a hint of being able to call and execute a function via URL. Would that be the equivalent of a webhook receiver? And are there any hints you would have for setting up something like that? Good question. I know relatively little about webhooks. I've seen them used a little bit in WooCommerce. basically what I understand that a webhook is, and somebody unmute themselves and correct me if I'm like completely off base, is a webhook is a kind of thing where, you know, when I, you know, walk 1,000 steps on my phone sends an alert to my blog, and my blog says, and my blog does a little bit of math and says, I've now met my steps goal for the 50th day in a row. So it's essentially like a kind of like a push notification across different, across kind of different applications entirely. So a webhook is like kind of like a listener for things getting pushed across it. If I was going to build the thing I just described, I would probably use Zapier, which is just this tool that is designed to sit in the middle of apps as diverse as, you know, LinkedIn and Instagram, you know, and WordPress and QuickBooks and so on. And it's designed to kind of like mediate between them when something happens. In terms of like calling and executing a function via URL, I'm not sure I understand that totally. Like I'd have to just know kind of more about what you're thinking. The little kind of guard, the thing that I wrote is called a guard clause. Here, I'm gonna share my screen and I'll show you guys. And this is something that I think is nice to talk about. Like here, I'll just write a new function to, like, never mind the fact that the guard clause here is that we're looking for a specific, like, a specific query string in the URL. Like, you kind of want guard clauses anyway. So let me just give you, you know, two options for how you could write a function. You know, function, you know, remove the title. And you know what? We're gonna. So, or no, how about function add podcast to the title. So we're gonna do an add filter on the title. And that's the function we're gonna run. Okay, so look, I wanna show you guys two ways we could run this function. Two ways we could write this function. Number one would be if, you know, get post type. Is that, how do you get the, let's, oh yeah, so we'd say maybe, okay, if is singular podcast. So if the current post that we're talking to is a singular post of type podcast, then we're gonna return podcast and title. Otherwise, we just return the title. So that would be one way to do it. Another way would be if this isn't a singular podcast, just return the title. And now that we've passed this thing, we know that we're working with a singular podcast. And so now we do kind of the work for which the function exists. So which of these two things is better? To me, the second function is much better. I mean, I don't know about much better in this example because it's so simple, but it's a much better way to think. The reason is because if you do it this way, you're locking the actual logic that does stuff deeper and deeper into what's called the control flow, which is basically the flow of logic that says when, you know, if and when you do a certain thing. So let's say we're going to add another layer. If get the author, you know, is Fred. Well, okay, how would you get the, get the author, I think get the author ID is a function. Let me just make sure it is. Let's see. Boy, WordPress's functions are so badly named sometimes. The author meta. Yeah, so you see how it starts with the and it outputs? That's because it's echoing. You see? We don't want this function that echoes stuff. We want get the author meta. So we're gonna retrieve, so let's just see how we could get the value, okay? So let's see. Okay, user ID. Okay, so get the author meta ID. Okay, so let's say that we only want to run this function if the author's ID is the number 1. And then if we pass both of our tests, then we finally get to return podcast. But otherwise, if one or both of our tests fail, then we do the default thing. Well, you see how deep we're getting here? We're already kind of 3 layers deep and we've only written like 5 lines of code, right? Well, how would we do that in the second example? In the second example, we just do that. We just write a second guard clause. So in other words, we kind of leave early. We leave immediately if the things we want to be true are not true. And then if we haven't left, we know that everything we care about is true, and then we do our work. Why is this better? It's because it's never deeper than 1 layer in the flow of control. Whereas this could get as deep as you like, depending on how many if statements you need. So the reason I kind of talked about, so this way of writing these things, this is called a guard clause. It guards against going any further if what you care about is not true. So the reason I mentioned all that is because Norm's question was about, you know, being able to like kind of filter things based on URL. And I guess the only thing I'm inclined to say is it's really awesome to be able to like only run things if a particular query string is in the URL, but it's not so much like kind of a special, it's not so much like a bunch of other things that I'm aware of like really come from that ability. And in fact, you can write a guard clause about just about anything. So there's nothing special about like looking for a particular query string in the URL. And I don't think that this is particularly how, I wouldn't build anything complex on this basis, on this foundation. I would like, again, I don't know very much about webhooks, but if you're interested in, you know, different services talking to each other, at the coding level, I would look into WordPress's REST API. I would look into, yeah, I guess webhooks themselves, which is a topic I don't know very much about. And if you kind of want something that's a little more sort of like drag and droppy to integrate 2 different services, then I would get familiar with Zapier. And somebody who is a kind of, I would say, a more well-rounded software engineer than me in general would probably have more to say on this topic. Okay. Yeah, check out the REST API. We do a lot, I mean, a lot of the later chapters, like there's a huge bulk of the last part of Up and Running that that is about the REST API. So I would definitely start there. We tried to make it, it's a pretty complex topic within WordPress development, and we tried to make it as simple as we could. Okay. Oh, and Norm, the last thing I'll say is, you know, the way it works is you know what you're trying to do, but you don't know how it could be possible. Like that's my experience. Anytime I'm looking at a new software system, I know what I want to do, but I don't know how it could be possible. And yeah, I think what you're doing is perfect, which is like try to take a step back and understand the landscape that you're living in before you invest too heavily in like one particular solution that might be based on like kind of a wonky reading of that landscape. Because the alternative is what Lisa asked us about like 15 minutes ago, where a guy was like, page templates exist in WordPress, and I also want CSS to treat these pages differently. And now she's stuck with 30 page templates, which is just not how you, that's just not how you build stuff in WordPress. Yeah. Okay. Norm says, I have a non-WordPress script And from that script, I want to kick off certain WordPress actions or return some data from within WordPress. Yeah. That sounds like a job for the WordPress REST API. Yeah, so you're either kind of posting to the WordPress REST API. You're saying, here, take this, like, take this information and, create a new user out of it, or, update a post based on it. Or you're pulling information using a get, like a get, HTTP get. And you're saying, listen, REST API, I want you to find all the 20 most recently published post titles, and I want you to give them to me as JSON. The reason it's called the REST API is like, that's an API is just a way for two things to talk to each other. Like a light switch is an API for like the wiring in your wall. So it's an API because it lets two different things talk to each other, like Norm is saying. Why it's a REST API is REST is a particular convention for building APIs. And as far as I know, I don't know if this is true for all REST APIs, but what the WordPress API works in is JSON, JSON, which is JavaScript. It's called JavaScript Object Notation. It's just a well-defined standard for like different programming languages and different environments to pass data back and forth. So PHP can pass JSON data to JavaScript, which can then chew on it and pass it back to PHP. And because they both understand what JSON is, you're able to pass things across those boundaries. So if you're using the REST API, what you would be doing is you'd be either pushing JSON into WordPress, or you'd be pulling JSON from WordPress and then chewing on it with the script that you're talking about that lives outside of WordPress. Okay, what else? Anybody kind of stuck or curious about what to do next on either like a personal project or a client project? It can be like Lisa, it can be very much like Lisa's question. Okay, Robert asks, what and when would I use what and when would I use appearance customize for example, customizing page content or just theme styling? So what you're talking about is the WordPress customizer, and I'll show everybody what that is. So the WordPress customizer lives here on customize in any website you're logged into. And what it is it's kind of a new interface, a new way of customizing a lot of different aspects of WordPress that WordPress core developed maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago at this point, and that everybody else now uses as the standard. So it used to be, 5 or 6 or whatever the number is years ago, that if you wanted to customize your theme, you were doing it entirely on the back end. You'd be going to like appearance and it'd be like, theme options and settings. And you'd be kind of sort of chewing through like these theme options pages that were completely different depending on who the theme author was. There was no standard. Now for most of those things, theme options live as, most theme options on most good themes live as kind of elements in the customizer. So this site that I'm working on uses the Beaver Builder theme, and almost all of its theme options are like custom elements here within the customizer, the WordPress customizer. So if you want to change something about let's say the logo, the header logo that the theme is expecting to put up here, you have to use the customizer. So that's kind of the first answer to your question is, good themes are registering like little customizer areas like this for almost everything they do. Maybe not everything, but for most things, especially things that have like a visual component, because what you want is you want to be able to see things update in real time. And the customizer is, so the customizer is built largely in JavaScript. And you'll see sort of the page flicker over on the right here. It's basically live updating the page by taking your changes in JavaScript and kind of, I believe, doing like an Ajax refresh on the main page here. So it's like such an, it's part of like this entire movement over to the front end where the changes you make live update. So yeah, so for most good themes now, the customizer is where you make most of your changes. And then the other kind of really important part of the customizer that I would recommend you take a look at is the additional CSS area of it. And this is standard in WordPress. It's not the case that like, oh, my theme added an additional CSS area. WordPress core has the additional CSS area of the customizer. And this is where I make a lot of my CSS changes to sites that I'm working on. The reason I do that is because it's live updating. So let's see, does Chrome no longer have Comic Sans? Okay, whatever. So if I want to see how this whole site looks in Arial, right, it's live updating. Or how the whole thing would look pink or whatever. So, and then, these changes won't be made until you publish. So I like to be able to just work in a live way where I can see, the changes that I'm making and kind of see how they look on the page. This customizer additional CSS thing is incredible. It's just, I love it. I will say that because, and this is kind of a theme like that we talked a little bit about last week, and that kind of happens all over the place, is you pay a slight performance cost when you use the theme customizer. The reason you pay that performance cost is because the theme customizer has to save your CSS into the WordPress database. In other words, there is not a .css file that just has your styles as like static CSS styles. It's actually having to take what you give it, save it into the database, and then pull it from the database when it's time to pull out all that custom CSS to make the page look the way it's supposed to. And so it's slightly slower. So what I like to do is, every so often, maybe every few months, especially if it's a site where I'm really trying to optimize performance, I'll just pull out all the CSS styles in the customizer and just put them in the style.css of the child theme. And that lets you do things like cache that CSS file, maybe cache and minify it and combine it with other CSS files using a plugin like Auto-Optimize. So I would say it's good practice if you are going to be writing heavily in the CSS customizer, every now and again to try to pull those styles out into another style sheet, I think is good practice. And just be aware that when you do that, you could run into some issues because the customizer CSS style sheet and the style.css in your theme are going to load in a different order. So if there's another style sheet in the middle, you'll find either that like your styles are now being overridden in a way you didn't expect, or you're now overriding styles you didn't expect to override. So in other words, when you pull stuff from the customizer-based CSS editor into, like, let's say your child theme style.css, just make sure that everything on your site looks the way you're expecting, because your mileage may vary. But yeah, so I love the CSS customizer. The performance hit is small, so you don't have to like be paranoid about adding 50 lines of CSS using it, and it live updates, which is what I really love about it. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that. Robert, feel free to add a follow-up if you'd like. Okay, so Norm asks, this may be too much for this call, but I'm interested in how to take a Beaver Builder module and extend it to add additional settings to the module settings box and have it available as a custom module. Again, it's Beaver Builder specific, so it may not be applicable to these calls. No, that's a really good question. I have never created a custom Beaver Builder module myself, which I think kind of speaks to the pretty good flex, like it speaks to the fact that so far I've been able to do just about most of what I want to do in Beaver Builder using its default modules. So for example, like this kind of hero section, like I had to be pretty creative in CSS to do it. But I didn't need to go as far as creating like a custom Beaver Builder hero module. And the things that I can't do with Beaver Builder, what I typically do is I register a shortcode and feed that into Beaver Builder. So like on the WP Shout homepage, like this massive scroll of first articles and then links and quick guides, this entire massive scroll, like you could not do this in Beaver Builder. So what did we do? I just created a shortcode that embeds all of the PHP logic I need to create this entire section of the page. And so I wrote that shortcode and I just kind of embedded it in this little Beaver Builder HTML element. So that's a nice way to get literally anything you want onto the page in a way where you can still, move it around and put it in multiple columns and give it margins and that kind of thing. So that's a little bit of preamble in terms of the way that I personally have, worked with Beaver Builder's default modules and also have supplemented what it's able to do with shortcodes as opposed to with custom Beaver Builder modules. And then the more direct answer is, yeah, I don't know how you create a custom Beaver Builder module. So let's just hop on Google, create a custom Beaver Builder module. Yeah, so it looks like the top result is the Beaver Builder, guide to the topic, which I would assume is pretty comprehensive. So that's the place I'd go to look. Oh, I'm sorry. Was I not showing my screen during that whole thing? Yikes. Okay, so let me just show you. Sorry. Yeah, that last 5 minutes must have been a little bit disconnected. I was talking about this hero area. Like you would think, oh, how are you gonna, you must need to create a custom Beaver Builder module to have this hero area, but basically it was available with, by just giving this, so this is a row, and you just give the row a background, and then, this is just a text module right here, and then being able to get all that on top of the nav menu is where I had to be pretty creative with CSS, but I found it to be doable. And then the thing I was telling you guys about WP Shout, let me just show you that. So this entire homepage scroll, recently published. So this is like, our 5 most recent articles, and then chronologically our recent quick guides and links. Well, you can't do all that in Beaver Builder. It's too complicated. So I just registered a shortcode called WP Shout homepage scroll, which defines in PHP everything that I want this section of the page to do. And yeah, you just pass it in, maybe using the Beaver Builder HTML element, or you could even use the Beaver Builder text, module. And then so you can still like drag it around or give it, give it margins or give it padding. So you can like get literally anything you want onto the page and then style it just like you could style any other Beaver Builder module. So that's how I've approached things that are beyond the capacity of Beaver Builder's default modules. Okay, Robert asks, I'm using it to allow a client to update a one-page site. Oh, Robert asks, I'm using the customizer to allow a client to update a one-page site, and I wasn't sure if it was the best way to let them make changes. Yeah, I mean, if they're making changes to their theme or if they're adding custom CSS, which most clients don't know how to do, then I think the customizer is fine. What most clients should be doing most of the time is changing content, and that would typically take place either in the classic editor or in the block editor, Gutenberg, or, if we're going with my, personal preferences, maybe in Beaver Builder if what they're trying to edit is something like a homepage or a landing page. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, so we're right about at the hour. Would anybody else? Okay, good. Damashe asks, can you suggest the best way? Okay, this is a great question. Perfect question to end with. Can you suggest the best way to create an alert banner at the top of a site? I was trying with ACF. Yes, I definitely can. And that's just one of these like kind of 1,000,001 like little pieces of kind of one-off WordPress knowledge that you build up over the years. This is the courses.wpshout.com site, and This is the plugin, DW Promo Bar. Oh, is it paid? I guess it's paid. That's kind of a shame. I mean, we've definitely gotten our money's worth out of it. So I don't know how much it costs. Let me just see. Basically, the thing that this is called in general is called a hello bar. So let me, okay, so hello bar WordPress. Let's see what there is. Yeah, so there's a hello bar WordPress plugin. Looks like it's only kind of meh in terms of ratings. Yeah. We've used this in the past, and it was pretty good. I don't know what led us to spring for this DW promo bar plugin. It must have been the case that the hello bar. Oh wait, no, it is free. Oh my God. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I would go with DW promo bar, and it's very easy to use. You'll kind of see exactly how it works if you just download it and just start playing with it. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. DW promo bar. Okay, any other questions before we wrap it up for this week? Jay says, thanks, good points about the additional CSS and customizer. Yeah, I was super excited when that hit core, which it feels like was maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. It just kind of really, if you know CSS, it really added a lot of interactivity to the whole WordPress development experience. All right, well, thank you guys. I hope you guys are staying healthy and safe and sane and all those good things. And yeah, next week will be our 4th and final live webinar. And that one's just they kind of all have been, but that one's just a free for all. So just bring literally any question you've got about the world of WordPress, and we'll just chew through those. Looking forward to it. Nice to see you guys.